let's be clear, Bitcoin is an international asset.
We are spending like drunken sailors.
Bitcoin is the only economic entity where the supply is unaffected by the demand.
If you want to preserve your wealth, you have to convert that currency into an asset that's scarce, desirable, portable, durable, and maintainable.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Scarce Assets, a podcast from Onramp Media. On today's show, hosts Andy Edstrom and Jesse Myers sit down with Natalie Brunell and Sam Callahan to discuss the importance of education in the Bitcoin space and the challenges of reaching new audiences. They also touch on the shift in policy and politics surrounding Bitcoin, particularly with regards to Wall Street's recent involvement. Natalie and Sam emphasize the need to focus on the fundamentals of Bitcoin and the power of education in spreading awareness and adoption. They touch on the potential for Bitcoin to create a more fair and competitive capitalist system, the rise of populism due to income inequality, and the role of journalists in questioning existing narratives. They also explore the themes of corporate adoption in Bitcoin and the potential for more institutions to follow MicroStrategy's lead. Both Natalie and Sam emphasize the need for content to educate newcomers and break down barriers to entry in the Bitcoin space. And now, time for the show.
Hello, my name is Andy Edstrom, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 13th episode of Scarce Assets, a show that examines scarcity, the most fundamental driver of economics and markets, and the scarcest asset of all, which is Bitcoin. Delighted to be here with my co-host Jesse Myers and our guests, Natalie Brunell and Sam Callahan, who are a legitimate Bitcoin power couple. Now, this makes them an extraordinarily scarce asset, and I have to say it's been a real pleasure watching them wield their formidable capabilities in the Bitcoin space over the years, and I'm happy to introduce them briefly. So Natalie is an award-winning journalist who applies her talents full-time to Bitcoin. She's a frequent guest on major news networks, including CNBC and Fox News. She hosts a fantastic show called Coin Stories, where she's conducted interviews of the biggest names in Bitcoin and adjacent fields. And her weekly Coin Stories news block is my favorite Bitcoin news program. Now, Sam is one of the best analysts in Bitcoin, and it's been a personal pleasure for me to read his research and watch him develop over the years. He publishes research for Swan as its senior analyst, and is also the host of the Swan Signal podcast, which is one of the few Bitcoin shows for which I never miss an episode. Anyway, in my opinion, Natalie and Sam are examples of exceptional talent applied to Bitcoin. I couldn't be happier to talk with both of them today. So Natalie and Sam, welcome to the show, and how are you?
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I wish I had been on CNBC. That's one network that hasn't called me yet, but it's on the goal list. So
no, I got it wrong. Maybe it was CNN. I was thinking. Yeah. My bad. We'll make it happen.
Yeah, CNBC. They have to get their shit together. Thanks for those kind words, Andy. I mean, I got to work firsthand with you, and it was a pleasure, and just excited to be here. Talk with you and Jesse. Two of my favorites.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I think Andy was touching on this a little bit in the intro, but Bitcoin attracts talent that Bitcoin, frankly, shouldn't be able to land. It's an exciting asset and space to work in, and intellectually stimulating and world changing, and it pulls in people like the two of you that probably could have a fantastically successful career in corporate finance or whatever, for Sam and Natalie doing any journalism that you decided to do, but Bitcoin pulls people like the two of you in, and that is, I think, you guys are like a microcosm of how Bitcoin wins in the long term, because it forces you to just get pulled in. You just can't resist it, or at least that's the case for me. And then you apply your talents, considerable talents, to spreading the word to the next Natalie and the next Sam. We're lucky to have you guys.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I thought about when I was doing my show. I was so fascinated by all the people that I was learning from, which was kind of the genesis of Coin Stories, because I love hearing people's backstories and their origins and what they overcame to achieve success. And I was like, how did all these people come to the same conclusion that Bitcoin is the solution to some of our world's biggest problems? And they come from different industries and skill sets and degrees and fields of expertise. And it was like, wow, it all culminates in this kind of this realization that Bitcoin can be applied to so many things. And I was always fascinated by that.
Yeah, it's the brain drain. It happens from all these different disciplines. And I think it's just curious people. I mean, everybody who's gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole knows how deep it is. I mean, it's endless. And there's so many different facets of Bitcoin that you can learn about that, nobody knows everything about Bitcoin, no matter how hard they try. And that's what keeps very curious minds just keep coming back to it. And there's curious minds in every single industry. And so when you get that Bitcoin bug, I mean, it's hard to shake off. You just keep going down and down and learning and learning and learning. And it really changes your worldview, I would say.
We talk
I'm
about
really surprised more journalists are not into Bitcoin, because I can't tell you how much what Bitcoin solves applies to the people that I worked with across the board. I mean, I started my career in tiny little news networks and made my way to national. And I think it would be so helpful if more journalists were not just trained to communicate well, but also learned how the financial system works, because it literally applies to every single story. I mean, Bitcoin could have been applied to any one of the stories I was covering, whether it was politics and public corruption or the cost of education and living going up and people fighting with each other over these problems. And it's like everything connects back to money.
At Onramp, we believe that Bitcoin will be the most important asset to own in the 21st century. Our multi-institution custody solution is the safest and most secure way to ensure that your Bitcoin remains in your and your family's possession for decades to come. Multi-institution custody maximizes security and minimizes counterparty risk, leveraging Bitcoin's native properties to eliminate single points of failure that have historically complicated Bitcoin ownership. Onramp provides peace of mind for your Bitcoin journey. For more information, check us out at onrampbitcoin.com.
It is amazing to see how it touches literally every aspect of society. I like the brain drain concept. I like the human capital and the normal capital that we like to talk about, the financial capital, the black hole sucking everything in. And as this asset growing and growing, just the amount of literal monetary capital as well as physical capital through mining, as well as human capital. It's just amazing to see. Well, you've both now been through, I want to say, probably roughly a full cycle in Bitcoin, maybe more. And as much as Bitcoin touches all those aspects of society, it's also a wild ride. Maybe we'll start with you, Natalie. What thoughts do you have since you pivoted your career to Bitcoin and this road that you've been on? Lessons learned or anything that our audience can benefit from.
Oh gosh, well, it's been the biggest blessing, the most rewarding work I've ever done, more challenging in many ways. I left one industry that was 24/7, where something crazy can happen at any time, and Bitcoin's 24/7 too. So I'm kind of used to that. But overall, it's just been really empowering being able to be my own boss and start a company through this podcast, and really the power of decentralization through communication and media, and seeing how important it was to sort of check the gatekeepers that I sometimes was feeling disillusioned by when I was working in the industry. It's crazy to look back on my time as a reporter, because I often would be attracted to the stories that were more investigative. I was usually an investigative reporter at my stations, and I just wanted to root out corruption. I felt like the average person was getting taken advantage of. And I think I saw a lot of the people that I interviewed as sort of like an example of what my parents went through in the great financial crisis. And I wanted to hold powerful people and government actors accountable. But when I was reporting, because I had no financial literacy and I was not taught in school about fractional reserve banking and money printing and all the things you really go down the rabbit hole through Bitcoin, to understand. I was assigning blame on the wrong places, which is, I think, I really understand when people get political and polarized, and I'm trying to yank them out of sort of that that false narrative of it's one party or the other, because it's really the system and the incentives that are so broken. It's not because the corporations are greedy or there's some sort of cabal that is guiding the way. I really don't believe that. I think it's the incentives, and I think we're all guided by self-interest, and Bitcoin makes that a good thing, flips it to the positive. And I just want everyone to be educated, because, you know, people are busy working so hard in all these different industries, and they don't even know how money works. They interact with money every single day, and their homes have become their savings accounts, and they're desperately trying to, you know, afford a family in all parts of the country and in the world. And they don't understand that, like, they're literally being stolen from every single day, and it's something none of them voted for. And so it's made me just really appreciate the power of education and teaching people really the basics of our financial system. And I'm grateful that I get to do that through my own show. I never thought that something like this would be possible.
It's a phenomenal blessing. Well, the education angle is huge. And Sam, I know you had the similar approach in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, is that by coincidence? Are you here? You know, are we all here doing education because that's just the way that we bring Bitcoin to the masses? What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, I do think education's really important, because I think the technology is on our side. I think it's just a matter of, it's like an asymmetrical opportunity right now, because the information isn't widely distributed yet. And people just have to understand what this thing is. There's so much misinformation over the years about Bitcoin. I mean, if you weren't a critical thinker and you just read the headlines, I mean, you would have shrugged off Bitcoin for a scam, a Ponzi, you know, all the bad things. It's used for criminals. Everybody who's gotten in Bitcoin early, multiple cycles ago, I mean, they had to be a critical thinker by definition, because they had to look past the headlines and do their own work and do their own research to eventually come to the realization that, no, this thing solves a real problem. And it solves the problem of the inability for us to save. I mean, it's such a huge problem that's faced by 8 billion people today. And so once I realized, like, okay, it's just people need to understand this, and this message has to be delivered to different audiences in a way that resonates with them. And I thought I could do that. I thought I had skills from my prior career, and how could I help Bitcoin adoption? I think I could, you know, use those skills to help drive Bitcoin education. And I thought that was the most important problem, is that people just need to know more about it. So that's kind of why I went the education route. It just felt like I could, you know, thrive in that scenario and that role. And I thought it was the most important thing to do, which was just educate. And multiple cycles, I mean, it is a roller coaster. I mean, it goes up and down, and you just got to strap in. And I think just focus on what Bitcoin is and why we're here. And it's because it's an empowering technology that allows individuals to save and just hit home that point over and over and over again. Because at the same time where we have this solution that only continues to grow stronger, so focusing on its adoption metrics, and, you know, whether it's institutional adoption, whether it's how the protocol is developing over time and adding more functionality, you know, focusing on those things instead of the price, while at the same time looking at the traditional financial system and how it keeps getting worse, right? The debt just keeps increasing and at an exponential rate, and just saying, like, look, inflation's rising and this isn't going to get better. You need to protect yourself. Here's this that continues to grow stronger. And so I think education is so important, and it's why I focus on that. And that's what I would say to people, like, going through multiple cycles or entering their first cycle. Focus on the fundamentals and focus on what you own and why you're here in the first place, and you'll be fine. It's a lot easier to hold when you're not staring at a price every morning or staying up at night checking your phone. Much easier to hold if you just focus on those things.
I actually want to piggyback off that. The fundamentals are so important. I think when you've been in this space for a while, we are in sort of an echo chamber, especially on Bitcoin X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes you forget what it was like to be at that very beginning where you're asking the very simple questions, you know, the very early questions. What is a node? How does Bitcoin mining work? And the more that you can really hone in and articulate those answers well, the more effective I think you'll be. And it kind of builds on itself in layers in the same way that Bitcoin does. Because now, I mean, one of my biggest challenges as we're in this new cycle is trying to communicate to those total newbies who, by the way, are now more skeptical, some of them than ever, because of what they saw happen with FTX and the crypto implosions and just the whole craziness of the market and the breakdown of what we're being told by media when it comes to the economy versus the economic reality people face today. And I really think going back to the basics is super, super important. I'm trying to do that through some scripts and videos that I'm putting together. And some of us have to really go back to the basics when we're talking to people.
Yeah, because it's, I guess this is one of the things that we don't talk enough about in Bitcoin, but there is like a certain trajectory that every Bitcoiner goes through of like, you kind of stumble down the rabbit hole, you get really excited, and you realize that this changes everything about your worldview, about the world of finance, about the role of assets in a portfolio, changes absolutely everything. And for maybe 6 months is probably the typical time frame. Like you're an absolute zealot, where this is all you want to talk about. You at every barbecue, at every family gathering, this is you're gonna talk everybody's ears off about how they need to be all in on Bitcoin yesterday. And then slowly from that 6 month honeymoon, you start to lose some of the zeal, or you start to get jaded or a little bit more tired with the repetition of the constant FUD from everyone that you talk to. And it's hard to keep in perspective just how world changing it is to someone who hasn't heard about Bitcoin and keep that enthusiasm. Do you guys feel like you've gone through that sort of process of having to a certain extent losing some of that, you've been smacked over the head with enthusiasm, and then you have to find ways to remind yourself that this is the biggest story in journalism and the biggest story in finance day after day? How has that been for you, and how have you kind of approached that?
Do you want to go, Nat?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think depending on the day or week, you feel differently, right? I mean, the sentiment can change so quickly because Bitcoin is extremely volatile. For me, one of the big challenges is trying to make sure that my content is keeping up with the pace of the headlines, and it's something that is approachable to everyone if they don't know about Bitcoin, but also interesting enough for the people that are down the rabbit hole. You don't want to repeat too many guests and too many topics, but at a certain point, you're hitting a lot of the same themes, right? And they're important themes, and I can listen to them all day long. But it's just it always challenges you, like what other area can you explore, and what's something that maybe you're not that clear on that you could go a little bit deeper on, so that you expand your own knowledge as a host and therefore as an educator. And so it's really been an interesting cycle though too, because it just doesn't feel like the bull market back in 2021, which is really where I emerged as a podcaster, and I started to publicly share my takes on Bitcoin, and I left my mainstream media job. I know that we're in a bull cycle. I mean, we're up 100 or 200% from the lows, but the sentiment doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel, the excitement is not there. I've seen charts where people even going to Bitcoin podcasts or YouTube channels is nowhere at the level that it was during the 2021 bull run. And so I'm wondering, where is that interest, and what will spark it? And is it just number go up? Because obviously people at that point are just FOMOing and wanting to get on board and learn a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, my thoughts kind of change day to day on this, and I just try to find ways to produce meaningful, valuable content for the newbies and the hardcore orange pilled people.
You face the same challenge, Sam. I mean, you're doing in-depth analysis on, maybe not so much a daily basis, but at least a weekly and monthly basis, right? Mm-hmm. And then also day to day, you're talking, having conversations with Bitcoiners, for the benefit of both experts and noobs. Does it feel the same way to you, where we are in the cycle right now in terms of mainstream participation and interest?
Yeah, I think it's still really early in this bull cycle if I had to pick, because we haven't seen that like renewed retail interest, I would say. Like I haven't gotten like a ton of texts from friends, and you just really haven't seen that like FOMO. Same thing with like the comments and videos and things like that. Like it seems like there's either existing Bitcoin holders or there's like more institutional interest. Like I quote unquote the smart money, I would say. I don't really like that term, but I would agree. I agree with her. And I think that's the challenge of educators is like specifically like you have a experienced audience and a not so experienced audience, and how do you keep the content fresh while providing content that attracts both audiences? I mean, that's tricky, because I can go really in the weeds with a certain podcast with somebody about really technical stuff or more advanced topics in Bitcoin, but that's not going to be really helpful for somebody who's coming at it for the first time. And then it could kind of feel repetitive on my side to just go back to Bitcoin 101 stuff. But as Natalie said, it's extremely crucial to remember that people are coming at this for the first time, and you have to be the deliverer of that message, no matter how many times you've given that message before. And so just how do you give it in like a fresh way that keeps yourself interested, but also is really helpful for a beginner? I think that's really important. And yeah, it's just, I'm human too. Like if there's like the typical FUD that we've heard so many times before, that's so easily debunked. I mean, I just have a list of basically articles that other Bitcoiners have wrote that like I have in my pocket that I just throw out to them. And at this point, if I don't feel like arguing it myself, hey, just read these, do your own work, come up with your own conclusions. If I feel like they're genuine, then I'll talk with them and I'll kind of walk them through, hold their hand a little bit. But if I feel like they're not genuine, then I say like, look, you can read these articles. This has been readily debunked over the years. But as Bitcoin adoption's grown, I have seen like the conversations change a little bit. Like you don't really hear the tulip bubble, FUD as much anymore. And now obviously like the China FUD's gone. It's the FUD has changed a little bit. I think we still need better critics personally, but it's become a little bit more advanced. And now there's like this acceptance amongst investors that Bitcoin's not going away at this point. So I think that just shows progress.
I have two other observations that Sam made me think of. I feel like so many people right now are distracted by the election and all the political narratives. Like I'm being called on the news outlets a little bit less because I know that their focus is on the election, and I've made it a point not to go into that. I don't want Bitcoin to become politicized. I don't want it to be something that is right wing or left wing. It's bipartisan. It just is. It's neutral. It's a neutral technology, which we need so badly right now to hopefully help unify people. But even the algorithms, like on Twitter, I noticed that everything kind of ticks up and floats to the surface that is about these politically charged, divisive issues. And I hope that changes, because in 2021, we were all at home, and I think it was just we were dealing with the pandemic and everything was closed, and everyone was just kind of focused on the market in a weird way, and there wasn't this kind of divisiveness yet. It bubbled up in the pandemic, but I'm seeing people really distracted by politics right now. And Sam and I are actually we're planning a very special event here because we're passionate about orange pilling our local community. I think everyone should do that. Everyone who's passionate about Bitcoin should try to orange pill their friend groups, their family, their local communities. And just even, I mean, we don't want an event where we're just talking to Bitcoiners, right? And a lot of the conferences that we go to, it's a room full of people that believe what we believe, but how do you get the new people in to educate them and give them that 101? And it has been challenging in ways that I did not expect. Here in Missouri, there's a lot of wealth, mostly real estate wealth. And so they don't see the problem of broken money. They don't see Bitcoin as something they absolutely need to have in their portfolio and something that they would take a Saturday to learn about the history of money, which again, like I think all of that is so exciting. And I think most of us do because we've been down the rabbit hole and we loved that educational and knowledge journey. But it's really hard to reach new people and get them wanting to take the time out of their busy schedules and say, like, you really need to learn about this. This is super important if you want to preserve or generate wealth. And depending on the group or depending on their level of wealth already, it's sometimes harder than I've expected it to be. So yeah, it's coming up with trying to figure out how to distract people away from the politics to focus on Bitcoin, but also generate local interest in our community about Bitcoin and learning about it.
Yeah, certainly, we focus on scarce assets here, and I have to wonder if how much of it is just driven by the pain of the scarcity of whatever asset you save your money is. As you just pointed out, bunch of real estate owners, their primary asset, it's pretty scarce. On the spectrum of asset scarcity, it's pretty good. And I spoke to a group of realtors a couple months ago. I was actually surprised at the level of engagement and interest. I thought they would boo me off the stage when I started to explain how Bitcoin was going to take a bite out of their most cherished asset class, which is real estate. But actually, they were quite attentive. So maybe we've turned over a new leaf with respect to the real estate crowd. But yeah, it seems like it might take some time.
Yeah, and in Missouri, I don't think I've mentioned this to either of you, but so the family farm is in Iowa, so have some Midwest connections. Farmland has been a good asset class in terms of inflation protection, because it has that dual connection of if it's generating commodities. And so, the commodity kind of sets its own price based on all the inputs and what the market will support. And then, of course, real estate, so you're generating a little yield every year, but over the last few decades, the big net worth growing side of it has been the value appreciation of the land itself, rather than the little yield that you get every year from producing crops. And, if that's a big part of the culture, the investing landscape of your local region, that's a pretty darn good asset to protect yourself against inflation and to ride the wave of real estate value appreciation as that asset class has been monetized increasingly over the last 40 years since the inflation peaked in 1981. Interest rates peaked in 1981. So, that might be part of the uphill battle that you guys face with getting the Midwest to realize that Bitcoin needs to be a part of the 21st century portfolio.
So we promised we wouldn't talk politics, or Natalie promised she wouldn't. So maybe I'll push this one to Sam at least to start, which is you've been of course covering what's been going on Capitol Hill lately and the events of the last month. Do you see a shift in policy and the politics with respect to this, historically controversial asset?
I mean, I think it's undeniable at this point. The shift happened in the Biden administration, I feel like, because it's extremely obvious that Biden has been hostile towards the broader crypto industry, let's just say. I mean, pretty much every single thing he's said or done hasn't been favorable towards this industry. I mean, that's just kind of a fact. I mean, from the executive order, ordering different agencies to do research into it, and then saying like, hey, we have to stop illicit activity from happening with this new industry, to the illegal data collection on Bitcoin miners that after the Texas Blockchain Association sued him was found to be unlawful, to his budget proposal that says he's going to tax Bitcoin miners by 30%. It's really just a countless list. And then he appointed Gary Gensler, who has been, got dragged kicking and screaming after losing a lawsuit to finally approve the spot Bitcoin ETFs. He still hasn't approved the options on the spot Bitcoin ETFs. He did that rule for SAP 121 that turned out to be, again, it didn't do any kind of congressional review. He just slapped down this rule. There was no kind of comment period. The Government Accountability Office came out and said, hey, actually, this needs a congressional review. And then it hits the Congress floor and they overturn it. And then Biden says he's going to veto it. And then it goes to the Senate. And some of these Democrats go against party lines, passes the Senate with bipartisan support. And then Trump does his thing. And then Trump suddenly goes, hey, I'm pro crypto. And then the Biden administration's like, oh, okay. And then they start calling people. And then they actually follow through with the veto, which is interesting, right? which I think was a mistake, but maybe it's because of this other stuff that's happening with Trump. They feel like, okay, we don't have to be totally pro crypto yet. But honestly, like if you look at it, there has been this shift generally, and now there's like kind of more bipartisan support. There's more acknowledgement of some of the benefits that Bitcoin could bring. I mean, you have people like Lummis who have been banging the table, Tom Emmer. You have, Warren Davidson, who's in a leadership position. He's, the head of the House Committee of Financial Services. And so there are advocates in Congress for this industry, and now their voices are just finally being heard, I feel like. And so we'll see if this continues. There is momentum, and obviously having a leading presidential candidate coming out and accepting Lightning donations and saying he's pro crypto and he's going to build a pro crypto army. I mean, it's hard to say that that's not positive for Bitcoin adoption. I do agree with Natalie, though. It's like you don't want this thing to become a political issue. But we'll kind of see what the other party does. I mean, there's reasons for both parties to embrace Bitcoin for different reasons. So it doesn't have to be like that, but we'll see how it plays out. But I think the shift is there. I think it's very, very evident for those, keeping a close track of these things.
It would be such a shame if it does get politicized and becomes a partisan issue. And because effectively one half of the country would be locking themselves out of exploring Bitcoin and benefiting from its, savings technology properties for some amount of time. For, maybe that takes 4 years or 8 years or 10 years for the politicization to be undone eventually from the economic reality playing out. But Sam, I was surprised by the veto going through, because it sure felt like the Democrats realized that they can't afford to lose the crypto vote in coming into the election, and that they sent out some memo at the highest level, and overnight they were going to be pro crypto as well. It felt like that was what was happening, and then the veto goes through. So you're more plugged into this than any of us. What do you think? Where do you think that leaves the partisan nature of crypto right now, and where do you think that's heading into the election? And we won't get Natalie on the record for that, but
I think Biden
maybe we will
go through with it. Yeah, I just think he had to go through with the veto.
I mean, it was
a credibility issue. He made a public statement saying it, but I think Wall Street wants this thing overturned. Wall Street wants the ability to custody Bitcoin on behalf of their clients. I mean, they've seen this thing rocket up, and they've seen other crypto native firms benefit from being able to do it, but they haven't been able to do it because of this silly rule that was kind of implemented bypassing congressional review. I mean, it wasn't normal procedures. And BNY Mellon, State Street were building out their custody solutions for their clients. And because of this random rule, all that was thrown to the wayside. They had to basically fire a bunch of staff. I mean, all that stuff was being developed for years, and then the SEC came out and did that. So I say that because the Wall Street lobby wants this. The American Bankers Association wrote Biden a letter hours before he vetoed it saying like, hey, this is wrong and we want this. Actually, you're going to, this is harmful for financial stability. This is harmful for investors. You're preventing the most well-regulated financial institutions for custodying these assets on behalf of, their clients for the Bitcoin. And so, I mean, it makes no sense, but I think it was just a credibility issue. And I think when you have Chuck Schumer and major Democratic senators supporting it, I just think it's a matter of time. Maybe it needs an administration change for this to get overturned. Maybe somebody new at the SEC to kind of remove this rule. But it will get overturned because Wall Street wants this. And what Wall Street wants, Wall Street gets. I mean, it's one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C. So maybe it just needs a change in leadership before this actually gets through. But I think it's inevitable.
Well, and if you just follow the money, I mean, the Democratic senators that broke rank, if you look at where they get their donations, a lot of them obviously sided with the Wall Street and banking lobby that support their election campaigns. And so it was really interesting because for the first time, it was like the crypto industry was on the same side as the Wall Street lobby. And it wasn't enough for Biden to veto it. But I do think if you're going to try to come from the other side and ask the question of, well, why maybe would they not want this yet? There are some that would defend Gensler in saying that maybe they don't want the transition to happen so quickly because this asset class, as it eats into everything else, we want the transition to be as controlled as possible. And so maybe they're just trying to figure out ways to really implement and integrate this into the traditional system, which obviously is inevitable. But they're trying to, slow those tremors that come with any sort of transition, especially one that could be this sizable.
So, Natalie, you mentioned earlier that one of your inspirations to journalism was holding Wall Street accountable for things that happened, I think, in the global financial crisis. So you've watched this movie play out, and we've come full circle to Wall Street lobbying in favor. What, analysis? I'd love to hear your analysis. We kind of have a little bit, but I'd also love to hear your feelings about that.
About what? About Wall Street coming into Bitcoin?
Yeah, about Wall Street coming around to Bitcoin. Yes, exactly.
Well, I do think that it is inevitable, and I'm a huge proponent of free markets. And one of the saddest things that I think we have is crony capitalism as opposed to real capitalism. I feel like the value and the quality of goods and services, which would be much better, much higher if we had real capitalism, and things that didn't work were actually allowed to fail instead of bailed out. And as I learned more about the history of money and how we became global reserve currency and the Triffin dilemma that comes with that, I see why we've become so financialized and why bankers and Wall Street makes so much money. And so again, it's like you go down to the very core and drill down to the sand, and it's the money and the incentive system that's completely broken. I think that the incentives drive the outcomes, and so I don't think that there are necessarily a bunch of evil people who are running corporations and these Wall Street firms. It's just they're benefiting from a system that allows them to take advantage of it and be bailed out if something goes wrong. So I hope Bitcoin at the core will fix that. I think that it's a good thing. It's a creative that we have investment vehicles like the ETF so that pension funds and traditional mom and pop investors and RIAs can move in to start to adopt. But I obviously think that it's better to learn how to own spot Bitcoin and self-custody and do multi-sig custody, because why would you pay these? I mean, they're not high fees right now. They're all competing, but ultimately you're trusting an intermediary, you're introducing counterparty risk, and they take a slice of it. So it's not real Bitcoin. But overall, I think it's good that we've gotten to a point of legitimization, and I think it's understandable why the BlackRocks and many more firms that are going to follow are going to want to be big Bitcoin holders. So I tend to see things as all like everything's good for Bitcoin, and the more corporations on a big and small level that adopt it, the better. I hope that in the far future, I don't think this is going to happen overnight, or maybe not even in my lifetime, but I hope we do move to a Bitcoin standard where the money is universal and fair and can reinstate a system of capitalism that creates more competition and allows for, again, like real value to surface as opposed to encouraging monopolization. I think what companies do today is just, it's horrible. But again, it's not any individual CEO that's evil that's doing this. It's the system that they're taking advantage of to be able to take on cheap corporate debt, buy back shares of stock that boost executive salaries, while meanwhile the products and services that they offer continually deteriorate, and the average worker is making like 200 times less than a CEO. You can understand why populism is on the rise and the workers feel disenfranchised, because they are. And so if you had a system that disincentivized things like that, and people had to actually compete based on real value, and you couldn't just take on all this debt and leverage and rehypothecate, maybe we would have a better system. Maybe we would have things that we don't even, we can't even imagine now. Maybe we would have faster planes and cooler cars and things that got blocked by regulations and got, I don't know. I imagine a more abundant and better world with Bitcoin, but I don't know how long it will take for us to be on the Bitcoin standard.
That was awesome. That was the war cry of Bitcoin evangelism right there. Like you brought it back to the true north of this makes everything better and breaks the drag that the economy has suffered from for the fiat era, and can return us to an era of innovation and abundance through scarcity. Ironically, like that's, if you have scarcity in the money, you have abundance in economic innovation. It seems, at least looking at the 150 years between the American Revolution and the advent of central banking in 1913. So yeah, hell yeah, Natalie, I was loving that. That was a great rant.
Yeah, it was a great rant.
Well, I think about it a lot. I mean, I think most of us do, especially when we travel, even people who don't understand Bitcoin. It's like, why are planes, they feel smaller, the food isn't as good as it used to be, nothing's as clean as it used to be. My meal at the store is more expensive, but it's smaller and the ingredients are awful for me. It's like, just follow the money, follow why this is happening, because they have to continue to get X amount, increase in the amount of size and profit every single year. And how are you gonna do that without sacrificing the quality while you're paying your CEO, $5 million a year? All of this, that's why I totally get why people are like, we need a higher minimum wage. I don't believe in it anymore because of the economic studies I've done, but it's like, I get why the cries are there, because everyone recognizes the problem. They just can't figure out how to properly identify the cause and what the solution is.
Whether you've been buying Bitcoin for years or just getting started on your journey, our multi-institution custody solution is the safest and easiest way to custody your Bitcoin. With Onramp and our partners at BitGo and CoinCover, you can sleep soundly at night knowing that your Bitcoin is safe from exchange failures, the loss of seed phrases, and broken hardware devices. Onramp's multi-institution custody solution eliminates any single point of failure, distributes counterparty risk, and minimizes required trust, all while providing greater assurances that a client's Bitcoin is secure and auditable on-chain. As a client of Onramp, your assets live in a multi-sig vault controlled by 3 distinct entities, none of which have unilateral control. Onramp provides products and services that honor our clients' ownership and control of the underlying asset. To learn more about multi-institution custody, check us out at onrampbitcoin.com.
When you're talking about this, it sounds like pure journalism to me. Like I just keep being struck by, like, this is a journalist's curiosity and intellectual curiosity digging into the core problem here, and it brings it back to what you said earlier, Natalie. Like, I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Why haven't more journalists figured out that this is the thing that they should be focused on?
Yeah, I've wondered that, because first of all, it's funny. A lot of people think that news is very glamorous. So you're on TV, so you must make a ton of money, and what a great lifestyle. It's really tough. You start out, and my first job was paying like $28,000 a year when I had student loan debt. And my first internship in high school paid more than my first real job with a master's degree in news. And it's a tough grind. You work weekends, you work nights, you're sent on some of the most dangerous stories and settings and environments. But what I realized is that I think one of the reasons I appreciated Bitcoin more and faster than my colleagues seem to be is I had a pain point, and that pain point was my family's financial loss and crisis. And the two of them, my parents, I grew up with the stories of them growing up under communism and how this total government control of the economy was a way to create poverty, and the black market is where people transacted in value, and there was real price discovery. I didn't actually learn until very recently that the reason that my parents were able to have an apartment in Poland, because everyone got like a small government apartment, but the reason my parents were able to actually upgrade theirs was because my grandma sold meat on the black market. She was a cook for government police. And she sold extra meat, risked her life and her livelihood by selling it on the black market, and was able to accumulate enough cash that they were able to get a bigger apartment in Poland before they came to the United States. And everything was transacted in that way. And there was just no social mobility or economic hope that you were going to be able to achieve something great in life. And my parents always wanted to come here, especially my mom. She looked at the United States as a beacon of hope and opportunity, that no matter where you come from, you could come from the deepest levels of poverty. If you work hard and you get an education, like, you can do and be whatever you want. It's like a level playing field of opportunity, and you determine it. It's your work that determines your success. And I think a lot of people hope for that. It's like the American dream became a universal dream. It tapped into these universal human desires that we all have. And I think that Bitcoin will help us maybe revive some of that, because you're right. I mean, when I was a journalist, I felt like a lot of people were getting sucked into the narrative of whatever these government agencies were telling them without doing some more critical thinking and questioning things. But because of my mom, I questioned everything. I mean, we would put out studies and I'm like, I don't think that this is what's the other side of this and why aren't we sharing it? And so I grew up with a very skeptical mind because of my parents and what they went through, where they couldn't trust their media. And my friends, for the most part, they grew up in that like golden era of America, I mean, 80s and 90s was amazing. I think it was like the best era to grow up in. Technology was like enough to make your life more interesting and easy and efficient, but not too much where you're just like sitting on your, phone all day and have a different version of yourself via online personalities. It was like a very prosperous time, I think, in America's legacy and history. And then all of a sudden we realize that we've burdened that entire generation and they're now trying to pay the tab and they can afford anything. None of my generation can afford their own house without parental help. And so a lot of the people that I worked with, they grew up in really great upper middle class homes. They had enough to get by. They weren't worried and they assumed that their job would only help them accelerate in life and do even better than their parents, only to, find themselves in their mid 30s now being like, why am I still working super hard and can't buy a house or can't start a family? And so that's why I hope more of them learn about Bitcoin. But I also think the people that reach Bitcoin sooner are the ones that have like a pain point or something that they experience where they're like, wait a second, there is a real problem and hopefully there's something to address it.
I love that analysis and the focus on questioning the party line, questioning the existing edifice, the narrative, essentially. That's fantastic. Sam, I'd love to get your take a little bit from an analysis perspective. You've been analyzing Bitcoin and everything it touches for years now. What are some of the more interesting or maybe counterintuitive elements that you've come across in your analysis, or maybe analysis that might violate some of the narratives, either with respect to Bitcoin or its value or anything it touches?
Yeah, I'd say, one is that, all these ETF inflows, and it's been interesting to see the price just go completely sideways. You had a big run up until March, and then it's just kind of chopped around sideways for a few months now. And people are like, well, what's going on? These ETFs are gobbling up all these Bitcoin, and there's only so much Bitcoin being mined after the halving. Where's the supply shock? Where's all the demand still there? And they're wondering why they're selling. But it's actually the long-term holders that are selling right now. So those like that metric that everybody pointed to all the time was like, oh, 70% plus of Bitcoin UTXOs haven't moved in greater than a year. People are holding. But what you see in previous cycles of when the price gets back up to previous all-time highs, you typically see churn there. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. So it's actually spot selling that I think is causing some of the sideways price action, or why Bitcoin's not going to the moon or going to 80K or 90K right now. People, if you think about UTXOs, just because people held for a year or two doesn't mean technically that they are convicted hodlers. It could be somebody who bought the last top, who's basically stared at Bitcoin and hated it for the last 2 years because it's been underwater. And they're like, man, this thing sucks. Everyone told me it was going to be great. They don't understand what they own. They don't have a long-term mindset, but they didn't want to sell at a loss during the bear market. Maybe they're smart enough to know that. So once it got up to their previous entry point, which is probably around the previous all-time high, they finally sell after breaking even, or they're a little bit in profit. So I think that's part of the reason why you see churn around previous all-time highs. And I think that's what we're experiencing. So people are wondering why it's selling. And it's actually these long-term, like convicted hodlers that are starting to sell. And I think that's temporary though, because I think everyone on this call would probably agree that now would probably not be a good time to sell. I think it's actually a good time to accumulate. Because you typically see this in the early stages of bull markets. Usually there's a bit of a chop around the previous all-time high. It takes a couple of times to break through with momentum, and then there's a lot of price discovery afterwards. And so I think that's ahead of us. And I think there's a lot of institutional investors that are still doing their due diligence with this thing. And I think that's still coming. You saw that from Fidelity, you saw that from BlackRock, Van Eck. They all said the same thing, is that primarily the first wave of ETF buying was primarily retail investors. It wasn't the institutional investors with all the money it was retail, because it just takes time for these large institutions to pull a trigger on a new asset. Some of them actually can't even do it before a certain amount of time if there's a new investment vehicle to invest in. So all that to say, right now, there's some long-term holders that are selling. I think that's temporary. I think this is a period of accumulation that's occurring. And I think this is the early stage of the bull cycle. And I think you're going to see a lot of these institutional investors, a lot of these big names. I think it's going to be the next SEC filings next quarter. I think you're going to continue to see really interesting names pop up, different types of institutional investors that are getting their feet wet here. And with each one of those, it just gets the market excited. Another pension fund, another big company, another really prominent investor. All those are like white swan events that will just compound it on another and get more people to open their eyes and maybe take a look at this Bitcoin thing again.
I'm beyond shocked that we're not at 90 or 100K yet. Beyond shocked, especially with the equities and the indexes getting to new all-time highs. I'm really surprised. And I think maybe we'll wake up one day with a massive green candle. But I'm really surprised we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I was looking at this recently. Last cycle, so in 2020, we got stuck at prior all-time high for 5 weeks, and in 2016, so then 2017, when we got stuck at prior all-time high, we were there for 15 weeks, and right now it's been 12, 13 weeks stuck at prior all-time high. So it's boring as it has been. It's par for the course. Yeah. And I think you're right, Sam. I think the snowball of good news is gonna happen, as the halving continues to play out.
Yeah.
It's bound to be.
Yeah, one more thing I'd say is that I love this report that Fidelity put out looking at Bitcoin's volatility. I don't know if you guys caught that one, but Hoffa, the CIO at Swan, he recently did some research on this too. It's basically we're at a historic low period of volatility from Bitcoin over like the last year. And typically that occurs at the end of bear markets. And you could think of it as like a coiled spring. And usually there's a lot of apathy with the price. And then there's really a lot of outperformance that occurs after periods of very low volatility, which is what we're in right now. And so that's another reason to get excited, I'd say. And I would just go check out that report from Fidelity. I think it's one of my favorite pieces that they put out in a while. So go check that out. Chris Kuiper over there and the team did a really good job with it.
There's a related dynamic there, perhaps, I think, Sam, which you highlighted with, price sort of bumping up against prior all-time high, and maybe those 1 year holders, reducing their holdings. And we've the price has hit, it's tested once, I don't know, we're on like the fourth or fifth, retest of that $70,000-ish level. And perhaps, perhaps once those, should we call them medium-term holders? Once we grind through their supply, there might be an opportunity for upward movement there. I'm curious, Natalie, your channel is substantial, and you're doing, relevant news content, week to week, but you're also interviewing experts in the field. And then I heard you say you're working on some more basic content as well. Are you seeing any patterns in interest in different kinds of content on your channel that gives you any insight about what people are interested in and what's going on?
Yes, fascinating insight. My most popular episodes are with Colonel Douglas McGregor and Whitney Webb. And both of them Bitcoin is a tiny portion of those interviews. They're really talking about the ideas of the New World Order and de-dollarization and things like geopolitics changing and corruption on a deep level. And people really respond to that. I did another show recently with Ed Dowd. We talked about sort of also that he investigates like the deep state and the consolidation of big banks. And is there kind of like a banking implosion on the way where we're going to have even fewer too big to fail banks and we're going to move to a CBDC? That got a lot of views and listens. So people are really interested in these very kind of triggering and sometimes outright negative themes and topics, which is, I understand. But I'm a really positive person. Like I really don't believe that there are evil people that are in control guiding us and trying to create this controlled demolition. At least I hope not. But in my core, I don't believe that. I think that the system, it's just so broken, and individual actors who are at different levels of power and influence are just taking advantage of it as best they can for themselves and for their families. And it's a lot of just, they want to survive and they want their organizations and groups of power and structures to survive. So I think we have to strike at the heart of all of it in a very sly, roundabout way, which is Bitcoin. It's not a war. It's not violent. It's not like coming at them aggressively and forcing anything down anyone's throat. It's like this peaceful opt out into a beautiful new system, because it's so hard to reform a very corrupted system and try to battle all the people who have much at stake. I think it's easier to create a new one and then get people to see, like, this one's a lot better. You should go over to this world. And so I think that new technologies always win. It just takes some time, and sometimes the old guard has to move on from this world, and that'll happen with Bitcoin. But it's been interesting to see that, like, when I bring on guests that are of sort of, wanting to talk about the new world order and the forces that are enacting more control and limiting all of our freedoms, that gets a lot of attention.
I want to underscore the Colonel McGregor episodes. I really enjoyed those. And he has, well, first of all, he's very articulate.
Yeah.
But also he has such a command and knowledge base of geopolitics and obviously military dynamics and understanding about power structures. And it is a nice juxtaposition, though. You're always so positive. Bitcoin gives you hope. It gives me hope too. It gives all of us hope. I think it would be a darker world that we live in today in the absence of Bitcoin's existence, for sure.
Yeah. Well, a funny story about Colonel too. I didn't know he was a Bitcoiner. I was really trying to better understand the geopolitical conflicts that are impacting the global economy. And I thought he was very smart about everything that's happening with the shifts globally and the risks right now when it comes to the dollar and our status as like a global leader. And then he just came on and he was like, I own Bitcoin. I was like, well, this is awesome. Now I understand why you said yes to my show. He's great. He's fascinating.
Love to see it. What about you, Sam? Are there any guests you've had on Swan Signal lately that have surprised you, or that have gotten surprising amount of traction in terms of the audience?
No, I mean, it's kind of been the typical macro guys that usually do well. People love macro. I mean, I think we all know that. So like the Luke Gromans of the world, James Lavish. I brought up Chris Kuiper. I really enjoyed that episode that I had with Chris, because
great.
When he came on and we really delved into proof of work versus proof of stake. And I think that's actually going to be a topic that's going to come back in full force here with the approval of the spot Ethereum ETFs. Why is proof of work so important? Why can't we do this by being quote unquote 99% more energy efficient with proof of stake? What are the trade-offs? And I think he does a really good job of laying it all out and the benefits of proof of work. And so I really enjoyed that episode. I got really good reviews and comments. And he said that he's been on a lot of shows and nobody ever asked him about that research paper that he wrote. And he says it's his favorite one that he's written. So that was probably my favorite recent guest that I've had on.
It's interesting for both of you. It's not really like Bitcoin specific topics that have been popular or gotten more traction for you recently. I sort of wonder if that's just a symptom of an outcome of where we are in the cycle, and that there's not a lot of fresh interest right now. Not a lot of people Googling Bitcoin for the first time at this point in time, but historically that happens for 6 months, maybe a year every 4 years, and we're kind of coming up on that time when that would typically start to happen. So maybe that will flip for you guys in the coming year at some point, where suddenly people there's a wave of new listeners who just want to learn about Bitcoin because the price keeps going up and they need to know why.
Well, I definitely think there's an appetite for 101 content because earlier this year we put out a course. I hosted it for Swan, and it's totally just 101 and really approachable, bite size, like less than 10-minute clips. Oh, sorry. And it's just talking about what is Bitcoin at the very fundamental level. And that got a lot of traction and a lot of views, to the point that I was even like, wow, I mean, there's clearly a lot of people who are just starting at the beginning who need more content like this.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much better evergreen content now than there was before 2018. It was like there kind of wasn't anything like truly evergreen. Like before bullish case for Bitcoin Standard, it was like Andreas videos. And since then, it's all the great stuff that Swan's putting out. All these awesome podcasts. Natalie, your stuff is just the most accessible for someone who's new to Bitcoin. That's actually, I point people of all the interviews, the podcasts that I've been on, I point people to the one that I did with you.
Oh, thank you.
As like, my go-to, because it's such an accessible format, and thank goodness that stuff exists. And again, this feels like this is how Bitcoin wins, because of the inevitable virality of the content propagated by more and more capable people as we move through the adoption curve and win more talent. It's great to see.
Well, I'm excited that you're both doing 101 content as well as, deep in the weeds coverage. Natalie, I wonder, this may be speculation. I mean, we can talk about what you're working on now or what stories interest you the most, but I'm curious what you think is likely to be of interest to you, not just to your audience, but to you specifically with respect to this whole wild and woolly space. I mean, what do you think you're going to be most intrigued about getting into the details on going forward?
Well, to be honest, my focus is really 101 information and content right now. I feel like there are so many people that we need to reach who we haven't yet. And I'm trying to just really put myself in that mindset that I had back in 2017, where I was first investing in Bitcoin, was totally skeptical, terrified that I was going to lose all my money, not sure what I was doing, and intimidated, frankly, by the space, because so many people come from an engineering or finance or computer science background. It was a lot of men. I just felt like I didn't really fit in, and I didn't have the expertise that was needed in order to get involved in the space. And I realized that, I mean, we need everyone. Bitcoin is for everyone. And so I'm focusing on that. I'm focusing on, like I said, writing scripts to help teach people, working on some special videos that will hopefully come out in the coming months, and just get people to really understand at a fundamental level why this is such an important opportunity, and maybe like bring together all of these great analyses and themes that so many people have written on, everything from the fundamental of how Bitcoin mining works to the human rights angle to the energy angle. And like, really, how do you break that down simply? Because I've always been someone who, I speak to a mainstream audience and I don't know what their level of expertise is. And perhaps I assume that they have maybe no financial literacy at all, like I did when I started out. And it's like, how do you make something interesting and approachable and easy to digest? Because if you really understand something, you can share it simply. And that's truly the greatest challenge, to know it that well that you can explain it in 30 seconds in a way a 5-year-old can understand. So I'm constantly on that journey of bettering myself when it comes to explaining Bitcoin simply.
Yeah, and you've clearly achieved that with respect to your, mainstream news show appearances. That's one of my favorite things that you do. But I'm glad that you're also applying yourself with respect to talking to noobs, talking to people that are just approaching Bitcoin for the first time. We're getting up on time here, but I want to ask you, Sam, kind of the same question.
Yes,
what do you think's what interests you most at the moment, or what do you think is going to interest you with respect to analysis or what's going on in Bitcoin in the coming months?
Well, I think corporate adoption of Bitcoin is really interesting right now. I mean, we saw Semler Scientific come out and basically implement the MicroStrategy strategy, Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I think it's very, very early days there. And it's just fascinating to see them basically use the financial system to raise debt or raise capital any way they can to acquire this harder asset. I mean, it is that Pierre Rochard speculative attack in action right now. And corporations just have this access to capital markets that an individual just doesn't have. And so it's extremely exciting. And it's really not just these public companies. Any business that's like a cash flowing business can find creative ways to incorporate Bitcoin into their organizations. And I think you're going to see that really develop because some of these barriers that have prevented them in the past, like the FASB accounting rules, et cetera, they've come down. And now we have a proof of concept. I mean, you can't look at MicroStrategy stock and not say it's been a massive success since they've adopted a Bitcoin treasury strategy. And when Semler Scientific announces it, their stock goes up 25%. I mean, the market likes it. The market really likes it. And now you have, Dylan over in Japan, and, this is all just getting started. And so I think that's something that I'm really excited about, kind of looking at how these organizations are going about it. What is their strategy? I think you have these pioneers. It's such a deviation to how these CFOs typically think about treasury management for a corporation. So it is going to take time for these corporations to get their head around it. But the proof of concept's there. I mean, even just look at Peter McCormick and what he's done. I mean, it's amazing what he's done with that, football, soccer organization, whatever you want to call it. And, he's done, it's like what a Bitcoin standard does to an organization. I mean, it's probably even, there's some intangible stuff there that like we talk about at an individual level, what it does at the corporate level. So that's something that I'm really focused on, really interested in keeping track of. And so when another Semler Scientific comes out, I'm all over it. And I just think it's very, very early days there.
Yeah, it's so awesome what Peter's doing with Bedford, going from the 9th tier and with the stated goal of getting to the Premier League, and with the tailwind of Bitcoin, like that might actually happen. If that becomes
so cool. That's a documentary.
It's unbelievable. And you're right that I think that we collectively got lulled to sleep a bit on corporate treasury adoption of Bitcoin, the MicroStrategy playbook, because MicroStrategy came out with that. They're buying Bitcoin, they're doing this, and it felt like, okay, the next domino is going to happen any month. And it was years with nobody else following suit, right? And so I think that collectively we Bitcoiners sort of feel like that's not going to happen because it hasn't been happening the last few years. But you're right that like the proof of concept is there. And then the FASB rules, the thing that Michael Saylor said, this is one of the 3 biggest developments that could happen for Bitcoin. The FASB rules went through, and now it's possible for a Semler or any other public company to book profits on their quarterly reports from marking up their Bitcoin. And that becomes a much more attractive reason to adopt the MicroStrategy playbook. And now it's happening. So it really is like, we had to wait. We had to wait for the proof of concept to play out. But now it's time to actually get excited about that playbook. I think you're right, Sam.
Yeah, I think just one other thing is just like the SAB 121. Once that gets overturned, if you have a corporation and your existing banking partners can finally just help you out, you don't have to get another bank and go find like the Coinbases of the world, whoever it is, to have a whole nother custody situation. Your existing banking partner that you do all the business with, that you've been with for 10, 15 years, now they can just make it easy to custody on your behalf, because institutions are different, right? They're completely different. That's going to open the doors as well. Anything that like reduces the barrier of entry for these CFOs and CEOs is going to be helpful for corporate adoption. So I think that's one thing Saylor said as well. You need to break down the barrier for Wall Street institutions and large financial institutions to be able to custody these assets as well. And I know we always talk about self-custody and how it's important, but institutions are kind of different, right? They have different regulations that they need to adhere to. And so that's just another thing that I'm looking for that's going to just be tailwind to all corporate adoption in the future. And I think it's inevitable, like I said earlier.
Well, you have both been doing a tremendous job over the years of breaking down barriers with respect to knowledge and education about Bitcoin. So I thank you both. This has been a tremendous conversation. Of course, highly recommend people check out both your channel, Natalie, and yours, Sam, all of your content and your shows. And as we close here, just kick it to you, Sam. Anything else you want to give someone as a handoff? And then Natalie, you can close.
Yeah, no, you can just follow me on X at Sam Calla, SamCallah. You can find some of my work on the Swan Signal blog as well as Swan Signal Live. I do the podcast. And Natalie mentioned the event we're throwing in our hometown. You can check that out at bitcoin-lunch.com if you're interested in sending friends or family, or if you live in the area, come check it out.
Will there be chairs at the event? Just
there
curious.
will be chairs. They're literally fixated. It's an auditorium, so there will be chairs.
Sell them, huh?
Good to know. Good to know. Natalie, close us out.
Yeah, it's in a nice venue. I hope to help Orange Pill, Missouri. No, I'm just really grateful. This work is challenging in the most rewarding way, and I just can't wait to see the next wave. I really think a lot of millennial women are going to onboard next. A lot of my peer group, who I'm really excited for because they need it. They need it so much. And I'm just really inspired by the people I've met in this space, and I can't wait for, in the next year, the turnarounds, the big companies, the legendary names that were against Bitcoin who are coming around to our side, because really it doesn't benefit anyone to be against Bitcoin. This is Bitcoin. It helps everyone in every way possible. So I can't wait to see how this bull cycle shapes up. We've got a long way to go.
That's it. And we're looking forward to enjoying that ride. Well, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Sam. And this has been another episode of Scarce Assets.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. If you found the information valuable, please share the episode with a friend or leave a rating on your favorite podcast app. All the links we discussed in today's show will be in the show notes inside your podcast app. Before we finish, a quick reminder that Onramp Media is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment or legal advice. Regardless of where you are on your Bitcoin journey, we'd love to hear from you. Visit onrampbitcoin.com/contact to schedule a consultation with one of our private client advisors.